Otro comienzo nos sacude la tristeza para volver a este ritual. Hay que quererte carnaval con tus traiciones y con todo.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to My Home is Special. My name is Taylor, as you know, and today we're going to be talking about Uruguay. So, Keith, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thanks, Taylor. I'm looking forward to this one. This was the last stop of the first part of our trips, and we had a great experience.
So, Keith, I have a question. Did you get to everything you had planned?
So honestly, we did have a list of things that Coki and Santiago had recommended, but we didn't have a set itinerary for our time in Uruguay. We came in, went to dinner at our hotel because our Uber driver said there was a great restaurant right next door, and it was pretty good. The next day we got up and did a walking tour, and they dropped us off at the old city in the market, and we had lunch. And for an appetizer, I had a giant chorizo sausage, which was an absurd size for an appetizer, bigger than what you'd normally get here at Jim's Original on Maxwell Street. And for the main, I had this steak that was massive for a lunch portion of meat. So I was pretty laid out for the rest of the afternoon, but we had an experience booked with a pastry chef who made us some mate in her living room. We had her dog staring at us meanly the whole time because he couldn't come hang out with us. And then after that, we went to Carnaval, and I had another chorizo, and we enjoyed Carnaval. So I'm proud to say that of all the things Santi and Coki told us to do, by the end of the first day, we had pretty much checked all the boxes and had a really great experience in Montevideo.
Keith, do you even like steak that much?
So Tasha was vegan for a couple of years, so I eat less meat than I used to. I like steak, but not like that. That was a lot of meat. And I mentioned when we were in Argentina at the Estancia, they just kept bringing out beef and steak and beef and steak and sausage, and it was a lot. And so it was good, but I don't think I had steak again for the rest of the trip, and I have not had it since.
I don't think I would either.
Nadie nunca nos enseña qué es lo que necesitamos para ser papás de alguien es que no lo ven. Nos tiramos a la cancha.
So, Carnival is currently happening, right?
Yeah, it started, I think, at the beginning of February and runs for several weeks. It probably runs into March, the way they look like they were going.
So, was it what you and even us as listeners would expect it to be?
Absolutely not. First of all, it was great, but I brought my recorder and thought, based on the Carnaval that I had seen in Brazil, that somehow with my cameras I was going to work my way into the parade, and Tasha was going to have some kind of costume on. I wouldn't be allowed to take pictures of her, of course, but I had this vision that into the night we'd be roaming the streets of Montevideo with the Carnaval performers. That is 100% not what it was. They have basically performers every night at the official place where each of the murgas, which Santi said he was in, they have these parody performers that's sort of like musical theater acting, and there's 2 or 3 other categories. And each night in the main theater, it's an outdoor amphitheater that was built in the 1920s and renovated a few years ago, they perform for the judges. And there's like a contest. And every night there's 4 performances, I think, 4 or 5. We saw 4. It started at 8:30, and the 4th performer didn't start until 12:45. So we finished at 2 in the morning. It was fun, but it was different. It was like sitting down and watching theater. It wasn't like Carnival, like a parade and a giant party. It was just basically the entire community. There was a few thousand people in there watching performances of singing and dancing and acting. And it was a lot different than what I expected.
I was expecting you to talk about a parade. It reminds me of something called Nykirk when I went to college, where it was a bunch of performances that would get rated, then the winning team would get a trophy. That's what it sounds more like than it does a parade.
That's totally what it was like. There was no parade at all. The acting and the singing were clearly political parodies in a lot of ways. So they were making fun of the government. They were making fun of social policy. And in fact, the woman who hosted us for mate in her house said she really doesn't like Carnival because it's too political. And we were like, too political? Like, aren't you just running around throwing confetti at people? And the answer was no. They're performing. But when you listen to the lyrics, it was very clear the way the audience was responding and laughing, and some of the imagery and people that were in caricature costumes of the president, that they were clearly making fun of different social policies and things that they were not in favor of. But that's more what it was like. And since I don't speak Spanish, we had to try and figure out what was going on as it was happening.
How did you figure it out?
So we ended up turning to the woman who was sitting next to us, whose significant other looked exactly like my son's roommate. So we just kept staring at him anyway. And I finally said, "What are they talking about?" And she explained it to me. And this was probably somewhere during the second act. And we ended up talking for a lot of the night. And she was helping me understand what they were talking about and the way they were treating some of the low-income children in the country and some of the other policies and why it was funny and why the audience was laughing. And she was great. And we talked the whole night. In fact, they offered us a ride back because at 2 a.m. we were going to walk to our hotel, and we ended up hitching a ride back with them, which was funny because Santiago and Coki told me that the people in Uruguay are just really friendly and laid back. And here we are chatting up these 2 strangers at Carnaval, and they're just like, "Well, don't walk back. Let us give you a ride." It was kind of funny because we didn't really want to walk back, but we also didn't know that we should just hop in the car in Uruguay with these 2 people that we just met a few hours earlier. Luckily, it all worked out, and they were as friendly as Santi and Coki told us everybody in the country was.
But those are the experiences that make the most memories.
No doubt. But Carnaval was different. The acting and the singing felt like when you watch a children's play here in the U.S. The voices and the mannerisms and everything was like watching a children's play. But there were a lot of grown folks in there. I mean, it ended at 2 a.m. and families were there with kids and everything. So I understand why the country doesn't really get started until 9 or 10 a.m. if this is how they hang out during the weeknights. But it was a good experience, and we were really happy that we got a chance to experience it with the locals. Again, this was similar to other places we've been. It wasn't a tourist event. It was a local event, and we went to observe it as tourists, which is very different than when you go someplace and they're putting on a performance for tourists.
¿Qué haces, Eduardo? Bailo. Pero hay que buscar a Diana. Hay que buscarla bailando. Es una revista, si no, no bajan puntos. ¡Ay, que no nos baje, no nos baje! Otro año no. ¿Qué hace Pérez? Estoy pensando si quiero con dulce o salado. ¿Qué prefiere?
So, what's something you never expected to see while you were down there?
Well, I kind of expected to see mate. Coki and Santiago, when we were recording, were drinking mate and held up the thermos to the camera so I could see that it's not just something they were saying Uruguayans really love, it's like what they do. And I was expecting to see mate a couple places, but I'll tell you, it was everywhere. Even the security guard at the airport had his little cup. And when you see mate, you know what you're seeing because there's a thermos for hot water, so they're carrying that around. And then there's this cup, and it's like a metal cup, and it's got a metal straw in it, and the metal straw has a filter at the bottom. So you basically pour, honestly, what looks like tea leaves into the cup, and you fill almost the whole cup with these tea leaves, and then you just pour hot water in the cup and just sip the straw. And when you're done, because there's so many leaves in the cup, it's like a couple sips and the cup is empty, you just pour more hot water in. And people just do this all day. And you go to the park and you see people sitting, you see people walking, and everybody literally has a cup in one hand, their bag maybe over their shoulder, and a thermos that they're gripping in the elbow of their other hand. And a few people had these little caddies, and so you'd see like they'd be carrying this little thing. It looks like a picnic basket, and you have a thermos sticking up on one side and a cup with a straw sticking out on the other. And it was just everywhere. Everywhere you went, you saw this. And we finally got a chance to taste it. And, we were at a pastry chef's home, and she made these awesome pastries, and she made us mate, and it was good. At the risk of offending Uruguayans listening, it tasted a lot like green tea to me, but we also tried some of the flavored ones, and she put some sweetener in a different one that she made, and she also handed it to me and said, "This is what the old ladies drink." So I didn't drink a lot of that, but we did get a chance to taste the mate.
This reminds me of my grandfather used to have this giant Yeti thermos that he actually ended up giving to me because he used to work in the steel mills here in Chicago. And it would be filled with either coffee or tea or just hot water that he would carry around with him all day while he was working in the steel mills. And so it's kind of was like my first introduction into what I call like my little addiction into water bottles and, and thermoses and things like that. So that's really interesting to hear because that is like a direct correlation to like just my collection that I have. And it started with my grandpa's giant Yeti thermos. And it's one of those old school ones. So I'm wondering like what kinds that they have.
It was very similar to that. Like you saw some where people clearly had their favorite thermos and it had been beat up and they were just going to carry this thing until it just couldn't hold liquids anymore. But people just carried it. Some of them were huge. I was like, how much mate are you drinking? And what was interesting to me is it's caffeinated and they drink it all day, like into the night. At Carnaval, they were selling food, they were selling drinks, and they were selling hot water so that people could refill their thermoses for the mate. What was also interesting to me was that you can't buy it in restaurants. So you either make it with yourself or you share it with friends. And they have this whole ritual that we actually got a chance to experience quickly in Chile. But the person who makes the mate gets the first cup. And then when you're with friends, you pass the cup around to everyone else and they all drink from the same cup. And that's like the way it works. So when you see a group of friends, they'll all be drinking mate, but it'll be one cup, one thermos, and it's just going around the group, which made for an interesting thing for the germaphobe in me, because we were on a tour with a group of people and they're making mate and they're going to pass this cup around with a bunch of strangers. I was like, negative. You can go ahead and make me my own cup, please, which they didn't. So I ended up sipping that first. But when we made mate at this woman's house, she made us a separate cup. But the tradition is that one person makes it and the group shares it. So it's a communal experience of something that they do all day. And we asked her how old they are when they start drinking mate. And she said, as young as 2 or 3 years old toddlers. In fact, they have like play mate cups so that little kids can pretend they're drinking mate for when they get older, which is better because when I was growing up, we had candy cigarettes that would blow powdered sugar out so you could pretend you were smoking. Compared to that, I guess drinking mate at a young age is better.
Does it taste like the mate here that you can sometimes get at stores in America? I think about it like how Guinness in Ireland is way different than the Guinness you get here in America. So is it like the same situation?
That's a good question. You know, ironically, I've tried the Guinness in Ireland at the brewery, but I've never had Guinness here because I really don't drink very much. And I have not tried the mate here, but we absolutely will, and I'll have to get back to you and let you know.
So Keith, with every episode, you know we have to cover the story. So what is the story that you would get up on stage and share with us?
So maybe this one's a little bit embarrassing, and we were trying to think of a story, but we covered a lot of what we did just in running through Santiago and Coki's list. Sadly, I didn't make it to his neighborhood, but I think we did everything else. We stayed at a hotel in Montevideo that was nice, and they had a free breakfast. We don't really do eggs anymore, so the free breakfast at the hotel oftentimes turns into like this mediocre continental breakfast. You eat whatever pastries are out there and you just like basically carb up for the day. Some places have like pancakes or oatmeal and we can find like a good hot part of the meal that way. But without meat or breakfast potatoes, hotel breakfasts kind of suck. I need something that like I'm not gonna be hungry in 20 minutes when the sugar clears my system. And so we were eating bread and junk the first day and I realized that I missed these 2 vats of oatmeal that they had. And it was sort of like right next to our table. And I was like, oh, they had oatmeal. Let me go take a look. And so I told Tasha that I was going to go see if they made it with water or milk by opening it so I could take a peek. And she just kind of looked at me and I was like, I'll be right back. So I walk over and it had 2 black lids. One of them had the light on, so I assumed that one was on. The other one had the light off. And so I was like, well, if I'm going to get oatmeal, let me just open up the one that's on. The problem was it wasn't oatmeal. They had a self-serve pancake station and it was the griddle. So I'm looking at this black griddle thinking it's the lid to a vat of oatmeal. She's just watching me do this. And I grabbed the griddle basically with my hand and immediately burn all 4 of my fingers while Tasha's just watching like, what the hell are you doing? So I walk back to the table and I go, yeah, that wasn't oatmeal. She goes, yeah, of course it wasn't oatmeal. I was curious what the hell you were doing. And I was like, well, why didn't you stop me? And she just kind of looked at me and said, well, I didn't think you were going to reach over there and grab it. This is another example where maybe my judgment wasn't great, but like, Taylor, don't you think she should have stopped me somewhere along the way from like grabbing this griddle with my bare hand?
She definitely just let you burn your fingers.
Right. That's totally on her. I don't think she sees it the same way because we've talked about it and she used words that made me think she was questioning my judgment, my intelligence, which may or may not be fair, but for the next 4 days, every time I grabbed something with my left hand and couldn't feel my fingertips, I was reminded that they had self-serve pancakes. Ironically, on our last day there, I did make pancakes on that griddle without burning myself, and they really weren't very good, so it really was not worth it.
That has got to be my second favorite story you've told so far. Thank you so much, Keith, for this amazing time talking about Uruguay. I really enjoyed it. I think all of our listeners have. And I'm excited I think this will be our last episode.
This will be our last recap, and we'll talk a little bit in the next episode about what comes next, and then we'll catch up again when I get back from Asia.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for listening to My Home is Special. My name is Taylor, and as usual, we have the amazing Keith, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks for listening to this episode of My Home is Special. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you get future episodes automatically. Go to myhomeisspecial.com for the occasional email update too. That's where links to photo galleries and a few other surprises will live. Be sure to follow KBev Photo on Instagram for behind-the-scenes footage during our journey, and it'll be in the stories. If you just want the photos, go to kbevphoto.com. There's a lot else on there to explore. For now, this is Keith, aka KBev, signing off. Peace.